Thank you for joining this session on incorporating lived experience experts in commercial sexual exploitation and research. Today, we'll focus on the lessons we have learned from a qualitative study that engaged this population in the research process from research inception through dissemination and provide suggestions for future research collaborations. My name is Dr. Sarah Godoy, pronouns she, her, and I am the principal investigator of the research study discussed today, and will be the moderator of a panel discussion, which includes our lived experience experts. Let's start by having our panel members introduce themselves, please.
I'm Angela. I'm a mind-body energy coach, and my pronouns are she, her.
Hi, I'm Christine. I hold an MAICS, and I'm a lived experience expert.
Hey everyone, my name is Crystal Bennett. I'm a licensed master social worker joining y'all from Southern California.
Hello, everyone. My name is Phoenix McClay. My pronouns are they, them, and I am a lived experience expert currently residing in Washington State.
And my name is Jessa Crisp. I'm a licensed professional counselor, pronouns she, they.
To foreground the discussion, I will begin by giving a brief introduction to community-based participatory research. So what is community-engaged research? Typically, research studies traditionally use a top-down approach in which research excludes community members from decision-making processes. So in contrast, community-based participatory research, which is a type of community-engaged or participatory research, is a collaborative approach which is focused on dismantling traditional inequities by conducting research that engages, shares power with, and benefits communities of interest. CBPR is a research paradigm grounded in social action and critical consciousness theories, both of which underscore the role of participatory research in mediating community change across multiple levels of influence. In CBPR, shared power and decision-making is instrumental in producing collective action within communities. Community-engaged research is driven by 9 principles for praxis. So first, acknowledging community as a unit of identity is critical. Second, building on community strengths and resources. Third, facilitating a collaborative, equitable partnership involving an empowering and power sharing process that attends to social inequities. Fourth, promoting co-learning and capacity building among the collaborators. Fifth, achieving knowledge generation for the mutual benefit of all partners involved. The 6th principle of CBPR, focusing on the relevance of community-defined problems and using a social ecological perspective to do so, involving cyclical and iterative processes, disseminating results to and by all involved partners. And so we see here that this presentation itself is embodying many of these principles, including the disseminating of findings with folks who participated in the research study as a research participant and or a community advisory board member. And lastly, using the CBPR approach really requires a long-term commitment and sustainability of community engagement. So it's really not just a one-time, I am working with you, I am getting information from you or about you and the community that you come from, and then I am disseminating it into the world, but rather it is focused on creating a partnership, sustaining that partnership, making it mutually beneficial, and then continuing to do so beyond the research study. So these principles were applied to a qualitative study, which is part of a larger mixed method study. And we will talk about ways in which that has impacted the research process. So community involvement can benefit the investigation of new and unexplored phenomenon and serve as an important source of leadership by providing structure to guide research. Community advisory boards also provide infrastructure for collaborators to share community priorities, voice concerns, and suggest processes that are both respectful and acceptable to community members. Centering the perspectives of community members and key stakeholders can increase participant safety, the usefulness of study aims, and the meaningfulness of findings. So we see that this may be especially useful for measuring vulnerabilities and understanding stories related to commercial sexual exploitation. For this study, a community advisory board was developed with the support and guidance from a lived experience expert, Christine, who is a panel member today. Christine and I partnered early on years ago for many reasons, including because she is knowledgeable about community processes, well-connected and respected in the CSE community, and has experience collaborating with researchers. So together we held 2 information sessions to identify potential community advisory board members. Of the initial 11 individuals invited to participate in the information sessions, 7 individuals, including the community expert, Christine, indicated their interest in being part of the board. So each potential member was first they participated in the information session, then they were privately screened, really to assess emotional capacity and also availability. We know that folks in this field are highly busy, they have a lot of obligations, and so it was important to assess both of those things. And so after doing so, 2 of the individuals were agreed that it wasn't the right time for their participation. And so for many reasons, including not being available, but also being part of the research was not conducive to their recovery process at that time. And so in the end, we had 5 community advisory board members with lived experience coming from the Southwestern, the Midwestern, and Northeastern regions of the US. They range in age from their mid-20s to mid-50s, predominantly identified as cis females, including one who identifies as non-binary. And through this mutually beneficial partnership, we really designed the study from, again, inception, from the very beginning, what are research methods that we're going to be using, all the way through dissemination. And so we worked together for, at times weekly, for several months on end to put together this study. And so I'm excited to talk a bit with the CHAB members who are here with us today, as well with our research participants, to talk about how this actually works in the real world. Okay, so first question is to the community advisory board members. Can you tell us a little bit about developing the community advisory board and what the team dynamics were like for you?
I think we shared a deep respect for each other, even though not all of us knew each other on the front end of this project. And that respect just continued to grow throughout the project. I know myself, I placed high value on setting aside time for our meetings because I was excited to come back to each meeting, because I knew that what we were doing I felt like our contribution was so important, and I was eager to be a part of that.
As Sarah mentioned, this really came out of conversation and relationship. And as we know, working the field, a relationship, and we find healing and restoration in that way. And so the conversation and realizing like this was a very under-researched area, and she had the ability to like create a research project where I just have the ability to bring up the dynamic that there isn't enough research. And we partnered together, we listened to each other, and decided this was something we were going to do. And I think from inception, kind of this idea of the community advisory board, kind of in the field, we often talk about including people with lived experience, but that isn't often the case when it comes to actually being able to make decisions or have some agency in a project. It's oftentimes just giving your check mark on things. But in this case, we truly had folks that joined together and were able to, through conversation and through talking about different dynamics we see in this type of exploitation, and even our own life experiences, we're able to shape the questions. And like Sarah mentioned, we initially just opened this up to folks that had this experience and had this background and said, do you want to be part of this? And they came to information sessions, and then they could choose to meet with her again or choose to say, yes, I'd like to be a part of this, or no, I don't think this is time. And one of the things that was important to us that we had as much of a diverse group as possible. We did try to get other people from other sectors of the population. Sometimes they were too busy or they just weren't interested. And that was really important to us, not only geographically, but race and background and gender identity and all those things, because we didn't want to present one type of narrative, that's already happened a lot in the field. It was an opportunity for those folks that came in. Some had a lot of research experience and some didn't know anything about research. And so the ability to not only participate, shape the conversation, but also have the ability to learn, kind of like as you're in an internship or something like that, but it wasn't that high maintenance. And also there was community. So people, when they bring up something that was important to them or they cared about or they had personally experienced, because we had a sense of community and relationship one with another, that I feel like that was really respected. It was pretty reciprocal that of the community board members, there was no one person that was had more power or authority than anyone else. It was very much a collective village mindset that was really important and powerful.
Thank you, Christine. And I do want to note that the study was focused on understanding the life histories of adults who were exploited beginning at the ages of 10 and younger. And folks from the Community Advisory Board, talk a little bit about like what it was like being part of the actual research development process related to what questions we were asking, how we were asking these questions, the methods that we were using, how we were analyzing and giving feedback to people.
Being a part of like that process, I have to say, was very, very unique. And that in research, you feel a lot that the researcher is the one that holds all the power, has all the knowledge, knows all the right terms and words and everything. This felt very different. The shift was less about this power dynamic of researcher and then like participant. It was more of a equal kind of research process where the community members were invited to participate in organically creating the actual content. Sarah provided context, provided guidance, but it was really through our discussions and our communication with one another, talking, discussing, really kind of pouring out our hearts and a lot of, honestly, lifeblood into creating questions and crafting questions where we would have discussions about like, well, this was my experience, but I know this wasn't other people's experience. So how do we word this so that, it is approachable and open for everyone who has this early childhood experience? And that just felt very beautiful and unique to be able to come into a space to have those discussions without even a fear of like, I really never felt afraid of like the sense of judgment or censure or that we would fight. Where if there was disagreements, it was working it out with one another. Again, it's kind of this very community minded mindset of just working together to really try to put forward really good questions that were very thoughtful and very tailored and very specific, and so that it just felt like a very, very unique process that way as a community advisory board member that I really value and cherish, and I think is something that researchers should really seriously think about engaging a community to create the actual questions. And it's really bringing in that element of lived experience that enriches and brings a depth to research that is really needed.
So well said, Phoenix. That depth is what it was just the depth of what we were able to do. And I felt like I was really listened to in the midst, even though I'm not the one with, I don't have a college degree. And so it was something that I got to participate in without having the college degree under my belt. And that just felt like such an honor and a privilege, and something I was eager to do because I love research and I absolutely understand the dynamic and the power that it can impact for everyone working in this field. So overall, I would say the whole experience was very empowering for me as somebody who, tried a couple different times to go to college over the years and wasn't able to get very far for various reasons. And so just the way we listened to each other with civility, with respect, with, it was a rare thing. I haven't found that in a lot of other survivor, initiatives that I've been part of. The meetings were hard in the sense that we were so close to the subject matter. There were a couple of times when, an hour and 15 minutes would go by and I would, I was eager to be there and I was, showing up fully as everyone else was. And when we hung up, I felt the exhaustion and I felt that, we went into the depths of what we had experienced in trying to create informed and accessible questions. We worked really hard on the language that everybody would really understand and not be guessing at what we were asking. So, but it was, it was worthwhile. I also reflected a lot. What would, if we were really to be reimbursed at a level that was, equal to what we were giving, what would that be and what would that look like? And that to me is an important part that I hope people consider going forward when they're forming their own community advisory boards. That to bring us in is one thing, to pay us in a fair and equitable manner the way other experts would be paid, with considerations to what we're actually, navigating, that would be even more incredible. And we did see some funds come through, and we were constantly on the scope for who might help support this research, but it wasn't enough. And I'm not sure what the right dollar amount is, right? But it's something to be considered if anyone is as you're listening to us talk about the research, consider that, remuneration is imperative.
Something that was valuable to me is that through conversation, like Sarah had, research that she was referring to how to frame questions and how to life narratives and all those things. But sometimes we talk about a question, there would be a question that was posed and we would all discuss, like, I couldn't answer that question. Like, I can't answer, like, if I was asked that question, I would just not have anything to say. And through that, considering it from it was more of like the typical kind of perspective is more of like this, where one person's at the top and all the rest are at the bottom and you have to agree or not agree or whatever. But this was more level, like we weren't all on the same playing field, but a lot of it. And I do feel like I learned a lot about research and research processes that I didn't know, but I really liked that we could all say, yes, I had this experience. Some of the questions I learned that even not having an answer or not having a response or being able to say, like, I can't remember any of that is an answer. And so that was really significant because I always think of these things in fact of like, you're posing question A and I need to have, this thorough answer, or like exploitation started at X age and I was recruited by X person. And instead it was like, if no one has an answer to this, and that also is proving something. So I think that was really significant in the ability to truly be able to shape the questions so that somebody else who had this life history could go to those questions and feel like they were being seen and heard and acknowledged in the study.
Thank you to the Community Advisory Board members for providing your perspective. I would love to hear from both Jessa and Crystal. How did having this community engaged approach impact your experience with me as the researcher, and what you felt comfortable sharing during the interview process?
Yeah, such a good question. I think we, as lived experience experts, get inundated with research requests on a very regular basis. At least I do. And as somebody who loves research, I have said yes to a lot of, and I've said no to a lot of studies. I said yes to this one because I trust Christine, and she was the one who went ahead and invited me to be a research participant. And so I think the CAB did create like a place where people that I know within the field were reaching out going, I know that you have lived experience as a child who's experienced child exploitation and sex trafficking. Is this something that you would be interested in participating in, but also to not creating a place of coercion to go ahead and be a person to engage in the study? So I said yes. And I'm sure somewhere within like the informed consent, it was stated that a CAB was part of the design and methodology of the study. I honestly did not catch that. I didn't even catch that Christine, who invited me to participate in the study, was part of the CAB. I just trusted her through the relationship that I have with her, and the relationship too that I have with Angela and Felix. So it was one of those things that I met with you, Sarah, and um, it struck me very early on in the process of questions that were asked that these questions were different than any other questions that I've engaged with. In the past, like a lot of the questions through qual studies that I've engaged with, um, seem like they always miss the meat of what I want to share. And I never am given permission to actually go there. And that could be because of like my fawning that I respond with as part of how I respond to the traumas that I've experienced, which I think is really common when complex trauma is present. Um, but it almost like it unlocks something inside of me to go ahead and to begin to share deeper than I have ever shared previously. And that I think is very beautiful because that then is how we go ahead and can actually get accurate data and have accurate research. And I remember at one point, so we eventually ended up going into a second interview, and that was not necessarily planned. It was just like the questions opened up so much that the time set aside for the interview was not enough to go into the depth of the interview questions. And I think at one point, I said, and Sarah, you might remember better than me. You probably do because you are the one who has gone through all the transcripts and such. But I think I said something like, these questions are very well written. How did you know the kind of questions to ask? And it was at that point that I learned more about the CAB, pieces started to come together. Um, and so it was really powerful to be a participant and to feel the safety to go ahead and share my experiences in a way that I truly hope can create a difference. And it was also really powerful, like on a personal processing level, like to be able to have like a safe space to just have my story be witnessed and heard, and to be able to have that held so tenderly and gently was very powerful for me, just very like on that personal level.
Yeah, this was my first time ever participating as part of a research study. And I felt compelled because of the relational aspect. So just like you, Jessa, there was a relationship component of knowing someone who then extended that invitation. I think that that's really imperative in this work when we think about just the importance of relationship, and not feeling that it's simply a check the box or not being left wondering what's going to happen with the information once I provide that information. Um, During the interviews with Sarah, even though they were virtually, it felt like I was in my living room having a conversation with a friend. There was just a respect for me as a person and not as a participant. And that really came through. There were opportunities to, pause or to put up a hand signal if things got too heavy, or if I was feeling a certain way or having a trauma reawakening. And that just felt like it was an intentionality behind it, and that it was not just about going through this with an ultimate end goal or an ultimate purpose, but really going through it to be in space in a shared community, to develop mutual understanding and respect for one another's experiences and each other's work. And then even as we were coming to the end of our sessions together, as I remember some of the information, being shared in terms of just themes that were being found. And that felt just like an honoring of me as wow, I felt valued enough to know what some of the things were that were coming out of this and what some of the next steps were going to be. And then that invitation to be part of those next steps, which again, just let me know that this was much more than a study, but about a way to develop mutual understanding and relationship with each other to move the needle on this work forward a bit.
I agree. Like I too also sat with like the findings that were shared, Crystal, and like that was like so powerful. It made me feel less alone, and it made me go, oh gosh, like I'm not the only one. I think walking into this, I felt weird. I felt, yes, I'm a leader. I do other work in the community. And yet, like, there's always that place of like isolation or the imposter syndrome, imposter feelings. But then to have those themes reflected back to me and in relation to that feeling of safety, it was like, I'm not alone. And it felt so validating and it felt so empowering and just a really beautiful space that was co-created.
Thank you, folks, for your feedback. I do want to just note from the researchers' perspective for a moment that member checking was used as a tool to improve the rigorousness and trustworthiness of findings. And so I did meet with every participant, as was mentioned, and I went over the preliminary findings. I sought feedback from them, and that feedback was integrated into the analysis process. And so it really, part of the CBPR process, we know that one of the principles is the cyclical and iterative process and engaging with participants in the analysis. And then again, in the dissertation phase, dissemination phase really was being embodied there. And so I thank you both for your feedback and for bringing that up. So I'm going to pivot and ask, we've talked a little bit about this already. So maybe just briefly, Jessa and Christine, you can give a little bit of a snippet of what the difference was like with engaging in this research experience, which used this community engaged approach with other studies that you have participated in.
Well, for me, one of the things was like Jessa's kind of said already, like I participated in other studies to hope to bring my experience and knowledge about this area kind of to the broader field and everything. And usually I am not included in the study, or it's like a caveat. People hear the type of trafficking I've lived through and they're like, oh, and it's usually just a caveat, like it can happen this way too. But sometimes I haven't even been accepted in the study because then I'm not kind of the type of person they're looking for, so to speak. And I think for this, it just felt really honoring to know that we would really be moving the needle forward for the movement. And I felt very honored as the questions were being asked and all of that it wasn't like a shock and awe situation. It wasn't like it was something that we're like, yes, we're aware that this happens, and we want to be able to delve further in research and create new systems and macro level and all of that. And I think for me, it just felt empowering because it wasn't like I had to be gentle around the topic that, yeah, I was trafficked from a young age and, all these things, right? So I think those things were really significant for me.
I think for me, just to expand on some of the things that I've already shared, um, a lot of times, what I at least have experienced with research is as soon as the study is done, people just wash their hands of at least me as a participant within the research study. And yet, as somebody, as a professional in this field, I actually come across a lot of the studies that I was a research participant in. And sometimes it creates feelings of ickiness. Sometimes it makes me feel sad. Sometimes it makes me go like, but there's more that you could have done, but you didn't do. Um, but it also too makes me feel like that once again, that somebody's just washing their hands and just did the deed and are moving on. And I hate to say it that way, but that is sometimes the way it makes me feel. And yet, I think one of the things that has really stood out to me through the CAB and what Sarah has done is the way that she has seen me and has treated me as still in a very important part of this process. And the honoring that Christine talked about is exactly the way that I feel. Like I feel so honored. I feel so empowered. I was recently talking to one of my supervisors. I was doing a research ship this summer and was talking to her and just processing this process. And um, and like just walking away, just going like, this has been such an incredibly different experience. And yet this needs to become a model by the way research around exploitation and human trafficking takes place, simply because humanity needs to be elevated. And we need to have our voices, but we also need to be treated after the research is done as still as individuals that hold value in our work, and what we've provided to the researchers through that process is still something that we've given and that we've sacrificed. And so the way that Sarah has gone ahead and has continued to hold that so beautifully and so gently has just really impacted me on a very deep level. And this is the kind of research that I want to do in the future, if I am given the chance to do so.
Thank you both. I think you're also kind of talking about some of the benefits of using this type of approach, which I think, Crystal, is a great segue. If maybe you could tell us a little bit from your own perspective as a research participant, what some of the benefits and challenges of being part of the study were for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for the folks who are listening in, you're already hearing so many of the benefits. For me personally, I've gone through the last probably decade, not to age myself here, but as someone who has often felt that my specific experiences with trafficking have often gone unseen or unrecognized in the trafficking movement as a whole. And so it really felt very necessary for me to participate in this particular study to shed light and to give greater insights to the field of just the vast range of experiences that fall under the scope of trafficking and exploitation, and specifically for my personal experiences of familial trafficking. And, I would say, as a participant, as I've emphasized, and as you've heard other folks in the space say, but I've just been so incredibly appreciative of the opportunity to give voice to the experience, but giving voice in a way that allowed me to be the narrator of my own story. And I think, as Jessa mentioned, so often individuals are interviewed, they share their experiences and expertise only to then circle back around and read what somebody else has written and realize that it's missed the mark, or it has been captured in a way that is glorified or is trauma porn, in all honesty. And so this was a way to honor my experience, but also honor who I am now, as being encompassing that experience. Um, and also with the benefits, again, for me as a Black woman, who often experiences a lot of inequities, a lot of lack of opportunities, that those power dynamics that often exist when we think about who's allowed to be a researcher, who's allowed to present research, whose voices are valued and seen and heard, is that this opportunity just minimized that. And that, even though I was a participant, is then I'm being provided the space to now be part of how the data is being presented, not just in a verbal way, but also the opportunity to be part of the written communications of that. Although not a lot of challenges. I mean, like I said, this was my first time, and so I just didn't know what to expect. And so just that anticipatory anxiety of like, who am I getting ready to meet with, and what's that going to be like? And so I think even if there would have been an opportunity for like I don't know, a get to know you as a researcher before, like, hey, we're on, I'm going to ask you some questions. But again, that's just my own stuff, and it just would have been helpful to have some of that discomfort and angst mitigated beforehand. And then I'm an internal processor, and I'm also a visual learner. And so I found myself that during the process of the research, to have the question asked, I had to ask for it to be repeated. And then it's, you only have a certain amount of time, and then thankfully there was a couple of series of connection, but you find yourself in the middle of the night thinking, I should have said that, versus if maybe some of the questions had been written down and provided beforehand, it just would have allowed for some of that processing time and to come into space with a fully fleshed out thoughts.
And I think for me, just going back to the length of time, I think these questions, because of the intentionality of the CAB, it created such an opportunity to go deep into the way that at least I responded. And so the time cap that was first mentioned to me was just not enough because of the depth and how things got opened up. So I think that's just a challenge. And so seeing like how a CAB, those questions are moving away from the biases that one may have, which is going to initially and just automatically just create greater discussion. And then the benefit is just knowing that I'm not alone. And there's so much benefit to that, as Crystal said. I'm also to a familial trafficking survivor, and I feel so unseen, using Crystal's language, but also too, like, I feel so alone in my experiences. And so it was just really powerful to just know that I'm not alone.
Thank you both for that important feedback. Angela, would you like to share a little bit about the benefits and maybe some of the challenges as being a research participant?
I remember at one point a question came out and I thought, oh, we're asking that? It was so funny how I had completely forgotten, because the length of time went in between the conclusion of preparing the questions and when I was then asked the question. And it was an impressive, it was like, wow, we thought to, shape a question like that. So that was kind of I don't know, just a little chuckle inside, like, oh, wow, we were better than I thought we were even. And so it was really impressive, but I too have participated in a bunch of studies because I want research to have, to be a valuable part of the movement. And there's been so many studies that most of the questions didn't apply to my particular experience. And it would feel frustrating and aggravating. So again, with this, and I'm also going to say that the researcher matters, in case you haven't heard all that already from all of our collective, who's sitting there in the other space on Zoom, asking us the questions and, holding that space with us. That's going to make a difference. The narratives being held with care was one of our premier. All of us wanted that to be the case. And we found, just in the creation process, we found that with Sarah. So I'm really, it brought tears to my eyes to listen to Crystal and Jessa talk about how powerful this was for them and how it was part of their healing process.
And as for me, as a both community advisory board member and a participant, which was a unique dynamics in itself, not only developing, but then participating. What was just, again, very empowering and very special was being given the opportunity to just use my voice in a way that it's not usually invited into the space, as so many of us have already mentioned, that I have felt discounted, or when I have done multiple research studies, it's my experience of childhood exploitation doesn't seem to fit into these boxes that they're wanting to create. And so it's a very different kind of approach to research when you have the community come in and be like, what you're thinking about what this experience actually looks like is not actually what it looks like. And it's so easy in academia, I feel, that we just are taught this is how certain things are, but we never stop and ask, is this really how it is? And that is, both as a community board member and participant, it's what is so powerful and important to point out, is that it's really slowing down the research process enough to not just get to this goal of having amazing data outcomes, and it becomes, again, almost like a replication of a user process where we're just using people to pull information from them, and we just see them as data points instead of missing the true core of these individuals with individual experiences that may have similarities but are also very nuanced between them. And I think that's what's so important in this process, and why it is important to put more into research, to really slow research down enough to return to thinking about why do we have research in the first place and why it's important.
Thank you all so far. Everything has been really great. I think it would be really wonderful to circle back to a point that Crystal made related to equity and inequity. How can community engaged research foster more equitable outcomes?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've talked extensively during our time together just about how traditional research studies can be oppressive. They overuse academic garb, research hierarchy, and community, the community engaged research process really works to mitigate those power dynamics, build off the strengths of those of us who live the experiences, and really move us from a transactional approach to having the opportunity to really be transformational. And I think it's so essential to create the opportunity for folks with lived experience to feel valued, to know that we're valued, to know that we're believed, and to actually be treated as the experts that we are, in a way where our collective decision making is centered, and ultimately we're not just part of being part of the data collection, also part of informing and driving the next steps for the community and by the community.
I think those are great points. To end this discussion, I would love if everyone will just share one major takeaway you think it's important for folks to know about using community engaged research approaches and how that can change or impact future research.
Sure. So I can go ahead and go first. I really believe that by including a CAB, you'll not only have the opportunity to gather data that is important, but you'll be able to gather data that is deep to create transformation and change. I also really see that through a CAB, you can go ahead and engage in trauma-informed principles and be able to just really mitigate the harm of exploitation or re-traumatization.
I'd like to say that research can be a healing experience from everything I've heard and from what I experienced. And the being part of the community advisory board also was a healing experience.
I think going along with what Jessa said about being trauma informed, this felt truly trauma informed, and I would say that that also it allowed my own my own history to truly be represented in the written research, and something I've never seen before, and it felt very empowering to know that that had happened.
Just add just the necessity of using this approach, that we really need to shift our mindset to the decolonization of data and really learn that data should inform and the people in the community should be driving.
And just, Crystal, what you're talking about, the equity piece and the community piece and the decolonization, like bringing research back to the community, to the people who are affected by the experience, instead of the structure where it just has remained, again, the academic on the hill and the lowly people down below, and really bringing it back down to where it's the community and those who have lived in it get to share what has impacted them. And it is a part of the healing process, and that is so powerful.
From the researcher's perspective, I will just add that it takes a lot of time and resources to do community engaged research, but it's absolutely worthwhile. I think we've heard today so many beautiful points about the ways in which it can be a space for healing. It can improve the way that we see and understand knowledge creation, and it can really just shed light on stories that often are unfortunately in the dark and not only not centered, not listened to, not believed, but not offered resources to help support, to both prevent and to stop. And so I thank you all for your time. I look forward to continuing the conversation, and we are ready to answer any questions folks might have. So thank you all.